Watched my daughter through the diner window, her notepad tucked under one arm while she balanced 3 plates across the other. 22 years old, junior year at Ohio State's nursing program, and she still picked up weekend shifts at Harlow's Family Diner off Route 40. The November wind was cutting through my jacket as I sat in the parking lot waiting to surprise her with a ride home. Her name is Sophie. My daughter. My whole world since her mother Lynn passed from ovarian cancer when Sophie was 6. 16 years of the two of us figuring it out together. I work as a high school shop teacher in Dayton. Not glamorous, not wealthy, but we always had what we needed, and Sophie never once complained about what we didn't have. My phone buzzed. My brother Victor's number. "You still coming Thursday? Thanksgiving at our place." "Of course. Sophie and I will be there around 2. Want us to bring anything?" There was a pause. The kind that means something is being chosen carefully. Actually, about that. Cheryl was thinking, and this is just for this year, maybe it'd be better if it was more of a dinner party type of thing. Adults, colleagues, you know how she gets about these things. I watched Sophie laugh at something a customer said, refilling a coffee mug without being asked. "Sophie is 22, Victor. She's not a kid." "I know that. It's just..." Cheryl invited the Aldersons. "Ted Alderson. You know, he's the one developing that commercial property in Glendale. She's been trying to get his wife to like her for 2 years. She just wants everything to go smoothly." "What does Sophie have to do with that?" A longer pause this time. "She waits tables, Dennis. Cheryl's worried it'll come up. That Sophie'll mention the diner and Ted'll think. I don't know what he'll think. Cheryl's just particular." The words landed somewhere in my chest and sat there, hot and heavy. "She waits tables to pay for nursing school. She has a 3.8 GPA. She was just accepted to a clinical rotation at Riverside Methodist." "I know all that." "Then you know she's not something to be embarrassed about." "Nobody said embarrassed." "Then what did you say?" He didn't answer that. I told him we'd be there at 2 and ended the call. I didn't tell Sophie that night. She was too happy on the ride home, talking about a regular customer named Mr. Pottinger who always ordered the patty melt and always left a $5 tip folded into a tiny triangle. She'd been doing that since she was little, finding people interesting instead of inconvenient. That was Lynn in her, all Lynn. She'd even bought a new blouse for Thanksgiving. Not new. She found it at a Goodwill in Clintonville, $12, stark green with small buttons. She hung it on her closet door Tuesday night and asked me twice if I thought her aunt would like the cranberry walnut bread she was baking from scratch. "She'll love it," I told her. I almost believed it. Thursday we drove out to Victor and Cheryl's place in Bexley. They'd bought it 3 years ago, 4-bedroom colonial, professionally landscaped, the kind of neighborhood where people put their Christmas lights up before Halloween and hire someone else to do it. Victor had done well in commercial insurance. Cheryl's family money had done the rest. The house was theirs, but the taste in it was all Cheryl. We pulled up at 150. The driveway was already lined with cars. A white Range Rover, a silver Audi wagon, 2 Cadillacs I didn't recognize. I parked my 2014 F-150 along the curb. "We're early," Sophie said, pulling the bread from the back seat, wrapped carefully in foil. "That's good, right? We can help set up." We walked to the door. I could hear people inside already, the low hum of a crowd. Something jazzy playing on a speaker. I rang the bell. Cheryl answered. She was wearing a cream silk blouse that probably cost what I make in a week, her hair done like she'd had it professionally blown out that morning. Her smile when she saw us was the kind that reaches exactly as far as it needs to and no further. "Dennis, you're early. Thought we'd lend a hand." Her eyes moved to Sophie, down to the green Goodwill blouse, back up. "Everything's already handled. Caterers." She said it the way you'd say obviously. "Victor's in the den. Dennis, why don't you go find him?" Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, "Sophie, would you mind waiting in the mudroom? We've got guests with sensitivities, and I notice the diner smell tends to cling. It's just until everyone's settled." I felt Sophie go still beside me. "I showered before we came," she said quietly. I always do after a shift. Of course you did, sweetheart. Cheryl's voice was warm as refrigerated butter. It's just the grease. You know how it gets in the hair. It's nothing personal. The mudroom's heated and there's a bench. Shouldn't be more than 20 minutes. Cheryl, I started. It's fine, Dad. Sophie's voice was small in a way I hadn't heard since she was a child. I'll wait. No, Soph. Please. She touched my arm. Don't make it into a thing. She walked down the hall toward the mudroom before I could say another word. I stood in the doorway and watched her go, and I did the thing I will regret for the rest of my life. I went inside. Victor was in the den watching the halftime show with two men I didn't know. He stood when he saw me, handshake hugged me the way men do when there are witnesses. Dennis, good. Meet Ted Alderson. Ted, my brother Dennis. He teaches shop over in Dayton. Ted Alderson had the handshake of a man who practices it. His wife Renee was perched on the arm of the leather sofa. A glass of white wine held the way people hold things when they want you to notice the ring underneath. Shop teacher, Ted said, nodding slowly. The way you nod at something mildly unexpected. 20 years, I said. Steady work. He turned back to the TV. I found Victor in the kitchen a few minutes later, alone, refilling a charcuterie board with more prosciutto than any 20 people needed. She put Sophie in the mudroom. He set down the package, didn't look at me. It's just for a little while, until the Aldersons get comfortable. She's your niece. I know that. She brought homemade cranberry bread. She's been in nursing school for 3 years. She works weekends so she doesn't graduate with 6 figures of debt. That's who you're putting in the mudroom. He finally looked at me. It's one Thanksgiving, Dennis. Cheryl's worked really hard on this. I looked at the photos on the refrigerator. Victor and Cheryl at the vineyard in Napa. They visited every fall. Their son Bryce at his lacrosse tournament. Their daughter Mara at some charity thing in Columbus. Not a single photo of Sophie. Not one of Lynn. Not even one of our parents who'd been gone 7 years now. I set down my drink and walked through the kitchen, through the side hall to the mudroom. It was nice, as mudrooms go. Built-ins along one wall. Hooks with coats I didn't recognize. A bench with a cushion. Sophie was sitting on it, still holding the foil-wrapped bread in her lap, looking at her phone with the careful blankness of someone trying very hard not to feel something. She looked up when she heard me. Hey, Dad, how long have you been sitting here? Not long. Soph. She shifted on the bench. Bryce came by about 10 minutes ago. He saw me and said, Oh, I didn't know we were having the help over for the holidays. I told him I was his cousin. He said, Right, the waitress won, and then he left. I sat down next to her on the bench. We're leaving. Dad, no. Please. I don't want to blow up your relationship with Uncle Victor over this. What relationship? He put you in the mudroom. He didn't. She did. He let her. She was quiet for a moment, picking at the edge of the foil. It's not the first time, you know. What do you mean? She shrugged, not looking at me. Last Easter, Aunt Cheryl kept introducing me to people as Victor's niece who's still figuring things out. I'm in nursing school. I'm not figuring things out. A pause. Christmas 2 years ago, Bryce and Mara got these big gift sets, the good stuff, perfume, tech things. She gave me a candle from the dollar section at Target. The price sticker was still on the bottom, $3.99. Each word was its own small wound. Why didn't you tell me any of this? She finally looked at me. Because Uncle Victor is the only family we have besides each other. I didn't want to be the reason you lost him. I put my arm around her. She was grown, taller than her mother had been, strong in a way that nursing school makes you. But sitting in that mudroom on a folding bench with a bread loaf in her lap, she was 6 years old at her mother's funeral, confused about why everyone kept touching her hair and crying. You listen to me, I said. You are the best person I know. You work 2 days a week at a diner so you can take care of people for the rest of your life without starting that life underwater. There is nothing, not one single thing about you that is less than anyone in that house. Your mother would think you hung the moon. I know I do. She leaned her head against my shoulder. Thanks, Dad. We're going back in, I said. Dad. We're going back in, and we're going to sit at that table, and we're going to eat the food and drink the cider, and if anyone in there makes you feel small again, I will handle it. But we are not hiding in the mudroom. We have nothing to hide from. We waited about 15 minutes. I watched through the narrow window as more guests arrived, more coats on more hooks, the caterers moving back and forth with trays. Finally, Cheryl came back, that same practiced smile. Okay, everyone's here. You can come join us now. Just try not to dominate the conversation, yeah? These are business people. They like to talk about what they know. I didn't respond. Just followed her into the living room with Sophie behind me. The house was full, maybe 30 people. Cocktail attire, the kind of casual expensive that takes effort, cashmere sweaters and tasteful gold jewelry and loafers that probably ran $300. They looked at us when we walked in. I watched the assessments form, my Kohl's button-down, Sophie's Goodwill blouse, the quick recalibrations. Victor materialized at my shoulder. Come on, I'll introduce you to some people. He steered me toward the Aldersons circle near the fireplace. I looked back. Sophie had been intercepted by Cheryl, who was directing her toward a chair near the window, away from the main seating area. Like she was a coat that needed somewhere to be put, the conversation near the fireplace was about commercial real estate and interest rates and a golf trip to Scottsdale. When I mentioned I'd been teaching shop for 20 years, Ted Alderson smiled politely and asked if I'd considered something else. Market for trades is solid, he said, in the exact tone of someone who has never once thought about the market for trades. I kept watching Sophie. She'd sat where she was put, knees together, trying to take up less space than she already did. Bryce walked past her without acknowledging her. Mara, to her small credit, stopped and talked to Sophie for maybe 3 minutes before Cheryl called her over for something. The caterers brought out appetizers. Stuffed mushrooms, bruschetta, a shrimp cocktail tower that must have cost more than Sophie's rent. People drifted toward the dining room. I found Sophie's name card at the far end of the table, tucked next to the service entrance where the caterers kept coming through. I found mine 3 seats over, next to someone I'd never met. I picked up both cards and moved us to 2 open seats in the middle, between people who were already seated and laughing about something. Cheryl appeared behind me before I'd even set the cards down. Those seats are for the Aldersons. There are open seats at the end. The seating arrangement was planned, Dennis. So change it. Her jaw tightened. She took the cards from me and redistributed them without another word, her smile never quite dropping, but her eyes somewhere far past cold. Dinner was served. 4 courses. The caterers were professional and efficient, and Sophie thanked each one of them by name after she learned it, which I noticed and which nobody else in that room did. The conversation at our end of the table was fine, distant, the kind you have with people when you're both aware you have nothing in common and are too polite to say so. Then Bryce, across the table, said it. He'd been drinking since before we sat down. He looked at Sophie and said, loud enough for a half-dozen people to hear, "You know what I always wondered? Do you guys tip each other at the diner? Like, is there a waitress code?" A few people laughed. Someone shifted in their seat. Sophie's face went carefully, precisely blank. I set down my fork. Victor got there first, to his credit. Bryce. That's enough. What? I'm curious. She works there. It's not an insult. It's not a curiosity either, Victor said, and his voice had something in it I hadn't heard in years, something that sounded like the brother I grew up with. Your cousin is putting herself through one of the hardest programs in the state. That takes more than you've been asked to do. Cheryl put her hand on Victor's arm. Let's not do this at the table. She started it, I said, and my voice came out quieter than I expected, which somehow made it worse. 5 minutes after we arrived, she put my daughter in the mudroom because she smelled like the job she works to pay for her own education, so I'm going to finish it. The table had gone quiet. 30 people with forks halfway to mouths. I stood up. My daughter has a 3.8 GPA. She has been accepted to a clinical rotation at Riverside Methodist. one of the top teaching hospitals in Ohio. She works weekends at a diner, not because she has to survive, but because she refuses to graduate with debt that would follow her for a decade. She paid for the cranberry bread she brought tonight with money she earned on her feet for 8 hours last Sunday. I looked at Cheryl. Your son just asked her if waitresses tip each other. Your daughter hasn't said 10 words to her all evening, and you had her wait in your mudroom because she smelled like honest work. Cheryl's face had gone the color of the poinsettia on the windowsill. Bryce is failing 2 classes at Denison, I said. I hadn't planned to say it, but I'd heard Victor mention it in a phone call 2 months ago, and it had stayed in me somewhere, waiting. Mara was dropped from her internship this summer because she didn't show up enough. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because the only difference between your kids and mine is that when my daughter struggles, she figures out how to fix it herself. She doesn't have a parent call the school. She doesn't have a check written. She wakes up at 6, puts on the green blouse she bought for $12, and she goes to work. I walked around the table to where Sophie was sitting, put both hands on her shoulders. She is the person everyone in this room should want their kids to become, and you had her sitting on a bench in your mudroom. Cheryl stood. Her voice, when it came, was very controlled. I think you should leave. We were planning to. I looked at Victor. He was very still, his eyes on the tablecloth in front of him. You know where we stand, Victor, and you know where you stand. I'm giving you a chance to pick. He didn't pick. Not then. He looked at Cheryl. He looked at me, and he stayed in his chair. I'm sorry, Dennis, he said, but you made this into something it didn't need to be. Something settled in me then, not dramatically, not like a door slamming, more like a weight I hadn't known I was carrying just quietly shifted into something I could name. Okay, I said. Sophie and I got up. We walked toward the front door. Behind us, Cheryl called out, "And take your bread, I don't need it." We stopped. I turned around. The appetizer table near the entry still held Cheryl's pride of the evening, a multi-tiered dessert stand she'd had custom-made for the party, 3 levels of petit fours, and decorated cookies and little chocolate things, the kind of centerpiece you set up so people take pictures of it. Sophie picked up the cranberry bread from where it had been set aside on the hall table. She unwrapped the foil, looked at it, then looked at me. Can I? I had no idea what she meant. Then she walked up to the dessert stand, took the bread, and set it right in the center of the top tier, between the petit fours and the little sugar-dusted things, like she was completing the display. Like it had always been meant to be there. My daughter baked that, she said to the room, to nobody and everybody. From scratch, with money she earned, and we walked out. The drive back to our side of Columbus was quiet for a long time. Then Sophie laughed. Not the big kind, just a real one. The small, surprised kind. Dad, yeah, thank you. I should have done it in the mudroom. You did it when it mattered. She looked out the window at the highway. Do you think Uncle Victor's going to be okay? I don't know. I kind of hope he is. I knew she meant it. That was the Lynn in her again, the part that couldn't quite stop caring even when she had every reason to. We went home to our house in Huber Heights. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, the gutters I'd been meaning to clean since September. We heated up leftover chili and ate at the kitchen counter and watched the end of a football game and fell asleep. Sophie on the couch and me in the armchair, the way we'd been falling asleep on holidays since she was small. Victor didn't call that night. He didn't call Friday either. 6 days later, I got a text not from him, from his personal email address, forwarding a note from Cheryl's attorney. Apparently, the dessert stand had been toppled in the commotion of guests leaving, which was not what happened, but fine, and she was seeking $450 in damages. I responded through a friend of mine who does family law. I explained that if this became any kind of formal proceeding, I would document 5 years of targeted exclusion of a minor and young adult family member, including specific incidents I could name, dates I could approximate, and witnesses I could locate. I mentioned I'd heard enough at family gatherings over the years to have a fairly complete picture of some tax situations that might not survive scrutiny. I never heard about the $450 again. Victor called in February, President's Day weekend, out of nowhere, on a Sunday morning when I was making pancakes. "Can I come over?" I looked at the batter in the bowl. "Sophie's here." "I know. That's why I'm asking." I told him to come. He showed up 40 minutes later, in a coat I didn't recognize, looking tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He sat at my kitchen table, and I gave him coffee, and he held the mug with both hands for a long time before he said anything. "Cheryl and I are separating." Sophie, who had come downstairs in her pajamas and stopped in the kitchen doorway, looked at me. "I'm sorry," I said, and I mostly meant it. "She's been with the Alderson guy for over a year," Victor said. Ted Alderson, the one she was so desperate to impress at Thanksgiving. Turns out she'd been impressing him for a while already. He laughed, but it was the wrong kind of laugh. I was so busy trying to keep her happy that I didn't see what was right in front of me. I kept telling myself we just had different standards, different ways of doing things. But the truth is, I let her make me into someone I didn't used to be, and I let her do things I never would have done. To you. To Sophie. Sophie sat down across from him. She still had her coffee from upstairs. "You can apologize," she said. "But I'm going to need to see what comes after it." He nodded like he'd expected exactly that. He came to her clinical pinning ceremony in March, sat in the auditorium at Ohio State with a sign he'd made himself, which was awkward and genuine and exactly right. He took us to dinner after at a Thai place in Short North that Sophie picked, nothing fancy, and he asked her about her rotations and actually listened to the answers, which is rarer than people think. He started showing up. Slowly, consistently, without Cheryl's permission or Cheryl's direction, just him. Bryce and Mara were harder. Bryce sent Sophie a text in January that said sorry for what I said at Thanksgiving and nothing else. But it was something. Mara called her in March and they talked for an hour and a half about things I don't know the details of, which is as it should be. Victor moved into a rental in Dublin in April, smaller than anything he'd lived in for 15 years, he told me. Said it felt more honest. He told me he'd sat down with both his kids after the separation and had a real conversation. Not the kind parents have when they want to be liked, but the kind you have when you want to actually help. He told Bryce he was going to get a job, not as a punishment, just as a fact. He told Mara that the internship, the real one she'd actually finish, wasn't going to be handed to her. Sophie graduated that May, top quarter of her program. She walked across the stage in the Schottenstein Center, and I cried in a way I hadn't cried since Lynn's funeral, except these were the other kind of tears, and I didn't try to stop them. She started full-time at Riverside Methodist in June. Med-surg floor, night shifts at first, the ones nobody wants. She took them without complaint. Came home some mornings with that specific exhaustion that nurses have, the kind that sits behind the eyes, and she'd sleep for a few hours and then be okay. She still works hard, still stops to learn people's names, treats the custodians and the transport aides with the same patience she gives the attending physicians, because that's who she is, who her mother made her, who I tried not to ruin. Victor came over for the 4th of July. We'd grilled in the backyard, burgers, corn, the watermelon Sophie had left in the fridge since Tuesday. He and Sophie sat in lawn chairs watching the neighbors set off their illegal fireworks, and they talked and laughed about something I couldn't quite hear from where I was standing at the grill, and I didn't try to hear it. It was theirs. He pulled me aside before he left. "I want you to know something," he said. "I set up real savings accounts for Bryce and Mara, not trust funds, accounts they can access for school, but only with conditions, a minimum GPA. They both have to work, real jobs, not internships, their mother arranges. Victor's law says if Cheryl got it for you, it doesn't count." I laughed at that. "Welcome back," I said. "It's good to be back." I think about that Thanksgiving sometimes. Not with anger anymore, that passed faster than I expected. Mostly I think about the mudroom, but Sophie sitting on that bench with the bread in her lap, trying to be invisible, saying, "I'm used to it," with the kind of quiet that means it's been true for a long time. And I didn't know. I should have known, and I didn't. But I also think about what she did at the dessert stand on the way out the door. How she didn't throw anything. Didn't yell. Just put the bread where it belonged and said what needed saying in one sentence. She got that from her mother. That particular grace under fire. Lynn used to say that how you leave a room matters as much as how you enter it. Sophie is in her second year at Riverside now. She was asked to mentor a new grad who was struggling with night shifts, and she said yes immediately, which surprised no one who knows her. She bought her own condo last spring in Clintonville. 2 bedrooms, 3rd floor, a little balcony she put a plant on. She still picks up a weekend shift occasionally at Harlow's, not because she needs the money anymore, but because she says it keeps her honest. Keeps her remembering what it feels like to be on your feet all day doing something people don't notice until it's done wrong. She called me last Sunday. Just to talk. We were on the phone for an hour and a half about nothing important and everything that mattered. That's the thing no one in that dining room will ever understand. Money makes a lot of things easier. It doesn't make you someone worth calling on a Sunday afternoon for no reason at all. Stand up for your kids. Even when the room is full of people watching. Even when the groom is full of people watching. Even when it cost you something, especially then, because they will remember not just what you did, but when, and the when matters more than you know. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that Thanksgiving, not in any grand philosophical way, just the practical kind. The kind you see when you're standing in your kitchen 2 years later making pancakes on a Sunday morning, and your brother is sitting at your table, and things are different than they were, and you can trace exactly why. Cheryl spent years building a life around the appearance of value, the right neighborhood, the right guests, the right seating chart. She taught her kids that where you sit determines who you are. She arranged everything so that the people she deemed lesser would stay out of frame. And the person she was most desperate to impress, the one she rearranged our whole Thanksgiving for, turned out to be the same person who was quietly dismantling her marriage the entire time. That's not poetic justice. That's just what happens when you spend your energy on performance instead of substance. The performance eventually collapses under its own weight. Sophie never performed. She just worked. She woke up at 6. Put on the blouse she found for $12 and showed up. She learned people's names. She said thank you to the caterers. She baked bread from scratch for people who put it on a hall table like it was a problem to be managed. And now she's a nurse at one of the best hospitals in Ohio, mentoring younger nurses, living in her own place, calling me on Sunday afternoons for no reason except that she wants to talk. That didn't happen by accident. It happened because she spent years building something real when she could have spent those same years being bitter about what she didn't have. I think about what I almost let happen in that mudroom. Sophie sitting on that bench saying I'm used to it. And me walking into the party anyway. I almost chose keeping the peace over keeping my word, the word I'd made to her without ever saying it out loud, the one every parent makes just by becoming one. I almost let her believe that the bench in the mudroom was where she belonged. The fact that I eventually walked back in and stood up doesn't erase that I left in the first place. I know that. She knows it too. And she's never held it against me, which is its own kind of lesson about the person she is. Victor is different now. Not fixed. Different. He's doing the slower, harder work of showing up without an agenda. He came to her pinning ceremony with a handmade sign. He asked about her rotations and listened. He sat in my backyard on the 4th of July and laughed at something she said, and it was real. That's what integrity looks like when it's being rebuilt rather than performed. It's not dramatic, it's just consistent. What I want anyone to take from this is something simple. How you treat the people who can do nothing for you is the most honest thing about you. Sophie knew that at 22. She learned it partly from her mother, partly from years of folding napkins and refilling coffee for strangers and treating every single one of them like they mattered. That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing. Stand up for your kids, not just in the big moments. In the small ones too, the ones that happen before anyone is watching. Because they're always watching. And they remember everything.